Robert Fox is London Evening Standard defense editor. Welcome to our program, Mr. Fox.
Hello, good afternoon from London.
US President Donald Trump says that Ukraine would like to go offensive and he will make the determination on whether he would support this effort. However, Financial Times reported that the US has been helping Ukraine to conduct these attacks on Russia's oil refineries and played a significant role in planning such operations deep inside Russia. Do you feel that this is another turning point in this war, this new US support for Ukraine, Trump's U-turn, so-called?
Yeah, I think it's very important for that, for the symbolism, because as you rightly suggest, when Trump came in for his second presidency, it looked as if there was a real turn at that point where Trump seemed to be soft on Russia, because it was quite clear that he and his team, but particularly he, wanted to have a conversation with Putin. They had the conversation with Putin, and we could discuss that more in Alaska. Putin, I think, really rather overdid it, because he and Lavrov came away as if they had won hands down, because they got what they wanted and America didn't get what they wanted. It's very interesting, the psychology of the two leaders now, to see, as I think we have mentioned before, they're talking past each other. And I think that we are beginning to look at what might prove to be a very bad miscalculation, personal miscalculation by Vladimir Putin, because Trump is extremely frustrated in that Putin, after all, really will not engage in talks, either with himself or particularly with Zelensky, because I think he really meant it, said he wanted the war to end, not because, only because of the glory after the seeming success in Gaza and the Nobel Prize and all that. But for Trump, it's very interesting that he puts it now to Putin for continuing what Trump, sees as a stupid and unnecessary war. That is a big change. And that's why the next meeting between him and Vladimir Zelensky is going to be really quite significant. I think it's going to be significant symbolically and practically, what in terms America is preparing to do. But the point that has been made about intelligence is absolutely true. And I think that that probably both America and the command of Ukraine would like as little said about that as possible, but certainly in real-time targeting for the depth battle, which is now happening at 1,500 kilometers, as you were suggesting, it's absolutely vital. Things are coming together there. And it's interesting, very quickly, that America is talking less about Europe really taking this burden on itself. And, it's really Europe's war, which we got back early in the summer and in the spring, and it's over to you now. What I suspect that the Trump leadership is saying is actually Europe is getting together, particularly the northern countries, the Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and that they and Germany in particular, they're ramping up the money, they're getting ready for their defense, and it seems to me that America has decided to help all it can while we get to the stage of Europe being fully prepared. And that's for an obvious reason, because they're worried that Putin, who's been very belligerent in his stance, in his posture, but particularly in some of the words from him and his leadership, that he's going to do something really rather rash in the next few months, believing that Europe is still too weak to really respond. And that's why the Baltic countries are very, very worried at the moment and are on full alert. Not that they're ever particularly not on full alert, but they have to be more on full alert, they seem to think, through the winter.
You also mentioned about the summit in Alaska. Did Vladimir Putin overplay his hand during this summit? And don't you think that he just made things even worse by attending the summit and giving Trump so-called, chance to end this war?
Yes, it's very interesting that Putin, he looked very pleased with himself because what he got in Alaska was that he was back on the world stage, almost that Trump, with his ambitions to the north, Greenland, the Arctic area, what he's saying to Canada, that, we'll share the Arctic together, I'm equal. Oh, that war in Ukraine, I'm not going to change my stance. And I think Lavrov, who was so interesting, I think probably made a mistake. Famously, he came along with the old Soviet ice hockey team sweater, and he opened it and he showed it as isn't this funny? But Lavrov was actually well worth watching there, because in the press briefings behind his position, there was going to be no change in Russia's stance. It was the terms of spring 2022, after the invasion that were put in Istanbul, more or less, Ukraine can be all right, but we want regime change, we want neutralization, and it joins the Russian family. It's inside the Russian family. That was a great mistake because he had to keep what Putin didn't do. I think that he humiliated Trump, not that Trump would admit it, because Trump had prepared for a reception leading to serious economic discussions, possible JVs, joint ventures, not only the minerals deal, but oil and gas, whereas to regenerate a lot of oil and gas, and particularly now with all the damage being done to refineries, not only refinery, but pumping station and lines. And you watch that as it comes up through the winter. It's the supply lines that are going to be so vital that they're going to need Western help. They can't do it themselves to regenerate that. So regenerate it. What Putin did in Alaska was that by almost insulting Trump, and not giving him what he wanted, he's cut off that line. And you see, it is a consistent thing. Sometimes it's very difficult to trace it, but it is a consistent thing, a consistent line in Trump at the moment. He is getting increasingly fed up with Putin now because he won't talk. He messes about. He's got this so-called offensive going on, which you know all about where you are, but it's not as successful as they claimed it was going to be. And now he's doing these provocations and probes and provocations in the Balkans, but above all in the Baltics, and where Estonia, Latvia are in particular warning their populations they may have to get out from the border area, warning to up to 400,000 people because they fear some adventure coming in either from Belarus or from Russia direct. This is very serious indeed. It's Putin saying, I am going to get victory, and if necessary, I want to widen the war. And Trump has realized that Article 5 of the NATO treaty really does mean something. If you attack a NATO power, then we have to respond as an alliance. And the high-stakes gambling that Putin seems to be doing at the moment is really beginning to worry the White House.
Also, you mentioned about these attacks on Russia's oil refineries. For how long can Russia sustain this? Also, if US provides Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles?
Well, I think the Tomahawks is a very interesting thing. It's an effective weapon. It's how would it be launched? Would it be launched from sea or would it be launched from land? There might be some technicalities there. And we've been there, first of all, with the reluctance of the Biden administration saying, no, we don't want to give you HIMARS. And then there's the whole question of ATACMS. And then the question of SCARP and Storm Shadow, not only saying we won't do it, but we don't want our allies to do it. And then the Brits and the French got going there. I think Tomahawk is immense value as a talking point. It'll provoke Putin. It'll disrupt him. But I think that the lesson that we have learned with Ukraine is it's got to build a lot of its own stuff. Which is doing very well. That in fact, one of the Georgetown University, Washington blogs was putting it. Is this going to become the Silicon Valley of drone development? The innovation cycle of Ukrainian forces really is a lesson. When you look at particularly the dreadful state for quite a big defense budget, your defense procurement is in Britain. But by comparison with Ukraine, it can innovate, it can improvise, it can turn things round so much more quickly. It's doing things in weeks, which it sometimes in the UK would take probably up to years to do, so much so that the most enterprising in the UK are actually working in Ukraine and with Ukraine, because that's the way to get fast and innovative development.
Let's cover also recent Ramstein meeting in the NATO headquarters with US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. He said, quote, "If there is no path to peace in the short term, US along with allies will take steps necessary to impose costs on Russia for its continued aggression." Do you feel there is a big change of tone here, even from Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War?
Yeah, from Hegseth, and I think the kind of thing that Hegseth was getting at, which has made America think very, very hard, is in the energy market. They are very worried about the sanctions busting. And it's very interesting how, because of this war in Ukraine, it's unfortunate for Ukraine, but it's changed the whole concept of neutrality. I'm sure it was the belligerence of Russia, particularly from 2014 on, Crimea, that persuaded, obviously, as we know, Finland and Sweden, that they really had to go and join the alliance. Now, the next one on the list is Ireland. Now, Ireland isn't going to join NATO, but Ireland realizes it's under surveillance threat continuously from Russia. Ireland has been particularly good at the warning about the survey ships, the surveillance ships like the Yantar, that kind of activity, and that they have seen Yantar a year or so ago off the coast of Limerick in the west, and they thought that it was so stationary. They said this is dangerous because they're looking at the main fiber optic node, one of the main communications, that is telecommunications nodes from across the Atlantic into Europe, which comes into that part of Ireland. And I must say the Irish government, which is poorly protected, has got really alarmed. It's got a lot of under-the-table agreements with the British because they have to defend the British Isles. And there's a lot of toing and froing of local intelligence, very important local intelligence. They may have to buy 2 warships that they hadn't thought that they needed, namely 2 frigates, surveillance frigates, to protect their coasts. And in addition, with Ireland, which is part of your story and part of the answer to your question, is that Ireland is very worried about the ghost ships, the shadow ships, the sanctions-busting tankers and freighters, tankers, which are often in very poor condition. They come out, they get through the Baltic, which is now vital ground, come round, and off Ireland, they transship or cross-deck their loads to smaller freighters and tankers, which go off elsewhere in the world, towards the Indias and so on, the other markets that they can find. They're very worried about that because of the condition of the ships. They fear a major ecological disaster from them. And unfortunately, many of the ships, smaller ships, that they transfer the crude, the oil to, are flagged of old British dependencies, former British colonies. They're called crown dependencies, and smaller places that are in the American purview, the Marshall Islands, the Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, carrying those sort of flags, and it is really worrying. And the Irish have been absolutely very internationally minded, very good member of the EU, and saying, look, this is a major security worry. We're not going to join NATO, but we want your help, and we will help you. Big change of dimension. I mean, this colours what Hegseth has been saying in Ramstein. They're fed up with this. They're fed up with the continuous disruption of Russian activities, and particularly cyber attacks and the drones, because it disrupts normal human life and human commerce. Particularly, we've seen Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and now very much the Netherlands, where the Russians have been jabbing Netherlands forces on exercise in the Baltics, in Estonia, I believe. And there is a general activity in the UK. We've had cyber disruptions of things like Marks and Spencer, the big store. But the most serious one has been Jaguar Land Rover, because that affected probably millions of people who are somewhere in the supply chain to Jaguar Land Rover. It is, I absolutely follow you. I think Hegseth has changed quite a lot. He's not criticizing Western Europe so much, and he is worried, and America is worried. They're worried about the disruptive effect of Russia. That as Russia isn't getting what it wants on the battlefield in Ukraine, it's really spreading all the way around, from the Caucasus through to Western Balkans. But it isn't entirely winning. As we know, it's got terrible trouble with its naval presence in the Mediterranean. It's got terrible trouble altogether, I think, with its naval activities. But as it hits terrible trouble, it becomes unpredictable. It becomes very, very disruptive. And that's why I think we're in for a rough 5 or 6 months through until the next spring. The tempo of events that we're seeing them now is not going to die down. It's not going to reduce in any way.
And from your perspective, can the Russian army go into next year, taking into account current pressure from the US and possibility of Ukraine receiving Tomahawk cruise missiles and intensified attack on Russia's oil refinery sector?
I can't work it out. I really can't work it out at all, because Putin is trying to create more armed forces. They have been making gains, I think, in Donetsk, and they've been making gains. It's funny, it's the sort of thing we saw in the First World War, where they were beginning to use aircraft for the first time. The same thing's happening with drones now. If you have heavy cloud and rain, it's very difficult to fly through there. And this has given Russia quite a big temporary advantage. But I see no prosecution of a major maneuver, by that a major territory, conquest of territory. So as I say, Putin is calling up people. He's got lots and lots of people. He's taking very heavy casualties still. So what do you do when you've got 1.5 million people nominally in the army or in the armed forces? You've got to use them or lose them. And that's where I think things get troublesome, because if they're frustrated and, they've cut down the bounty salaries for signing on, there are signs of trouble there because there is uncertainty in the economy, petrol rationing and so on. I think that we're in for a very, very volatile time there, and I've no idea what he will do. I think as somebody who is under pressure and who's so committed to staying in power by staying in a war, I think that Putin is quite likely to or even have already made some serious miscalculations.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump says that India will stop buying Russian oil. This was agreed during a conversation between President Trump and Narendra Modi, head of the Indian government. What is your take on that?
Well, Narendra Modi is quite difficult to read. He seems quite obvious at first, and what is his aim? But I think that what Trump and Rubio will have understood about India is that, you're almost in a way as worried about China as we are, that, that we don't know quite what to do. How much can we trade? How much do we compete? And how much do we have to defend ourselves? And what I suspect Trump has been, and Rubio have been very clever and clear about, is that, that you have this very close alliance now, and to an extent that we're still all the time discovering new details about this close alliance between China and Russia. And what Trump quite reasonably can say to Modi, that's no good for either of us. It's no good for New Delhi and it's no good for Washington. So we'd better think this one out. And by the way, you're helping it if you go on buying illegal, discounted oil. But mind you, as you were saying, there isn't all that much oil excess to sell to India, and there are problems because they have to use this increasingly troubled fleet of the ghost tankers, or in some ways they have to go through Azerbaijan. And the Azeris, and Putin had to apologize to Azerbaijan for the shoot down a year or so ago of the civil airliner, and he said yes, the Azeri civil airliner was shot down by mistake by Russian air defenses, because he's dead worried about that corridor, that cut through to Iran is being cut. And by the way, Iran isn't in such a good state. I mean, I don't go as far as the Foreign Affairs magazine, the new one, which has just arrived at my desk, which claims that the Ayatollah's regime is really beginning to wobble now. But a lot of Putin's allies are in quite a state now, and I think it's a very good, and the timing of Trump's moves at the moment seems particularly good. The way he moved on in Netanyahu after the debacle, the ridiculous thing that they did with the attempted assassination of al-Hayya, the civil leader, the political bureau chief of Hamas, that was good. And he got a lot of things rolling from there. And Trump does seem to be, when he goes to these meetings, he loves these meetings, and he's schmoozing, meeting people. He hasn't lost an opportunity. And he worked on Prabowo of Indonesia, particularly saying, look, we need your help, so we'll help you. And Narendra Modi, exactly. Yeah. And that's the Trump line that's working.
Israel and Hamas have reached a ceasefire deal and hostage release agreement. How could this Trump's success influence the outcome of the war in Ukraine and his efforts over ending the Ukraine war?
Well, the war isn't quite over. We're at a truce and a ceasefire because they're all talking past each other. And part of the plan, the 20-part plan for Gaza, was that Hamas decommission, as they say, and then step down from influence in government. Now, that's nonsense. As we've seen, it's the only game in town as far as security and stabilization. Quite unpleasant, so much so that it's trying to reassert its position, fighting gangs and clans inside Gaza. And Netanyahu is saying he doesn't want anything to do with Hamas, nor do some of the sponsors, the Arab sponsors of the peace deal, namely the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Oman, who didn't turn up for the signing of the Great Peace Declaration. But that being said, that Trump has said he's prepared to accept Hamas for the time being, because there is no international stabilization force. Sorry, that's a big preliminary to this, because your point is absolutely right, that Trump thinks he's on a roll now of success, and he's getting quite serious about stopping the fighting in Ukraine. I mean, that's the interesting thing for somebody who's verbally, in words, so aggressive. Trump really doesn't like war. He's got a very good focus on the instrument of war. It's something of last resort, not first resort. And I think both the aggression, curiously, of both Benjamin Netanyahu and Vladimir Putin really does annoy him if it stands in the way of making the deal for prosperity, especially his own country. And that's the way it's working. And I don't think that this is empty. I think there is going to be a major effort now to establish some kind of peace, some kind of ceasefire in Ukraine. But whether, this is the big question for your viewers, whether Putin could sign up to a ceasefire now and survive, politically, I think there's increasingly a question mark. I put it like that, a question mark, possibly becoming a real doubt about his survivability as political leader of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Fox, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Glory to Ukraine. Thank you.